Aloha everyone, welcome to week 2. This week our topic is young adults and dating violence. So you have a lot of readings this week and it might not seem at first that they all relate. So you have a reading about white privilege, a reading about virginity, and a reading about menstruation. And what do all these things have in common with dating violence, right? That might be a question you're asking yourselves right now. So in the introduction overview for the week 2 page, I string along a bunch of questions you should be asking yourself as you read the different articles, but I will make some overarching connections for folks if you're struggling with the material. So last week we talked about intersectionality and all these different aspects of our identity and what they mean, right? So typically we always pretty much associate privilege with the majority group. So the group that has power and control from a social institutional perspective. And then pretty much always we associate oppression with a minority group. Now that's not to say that there aren't individuals from one group or the other who experience the opposite. But generally speaking, as we think more broadly, more big picture about social institutions and privilege and oppression, that's one way we can think about things. Although, especially in the field of women's studies, we don't want to think about things as either or binary. So always keep that in mind and remember that just because somebody experiences privilege because of one aspect of their identity doesn't mean that they aren't a minority and that they experience oppression in another way. Because these things are always evolving and changing and they depend upon the situation and the context and what we're dealing with. So as a white woman, using myself as an example, I experience white privilege in my everyday life. And that's just something about me that is pretty visible. You can always kind of tell, right? But I also am a woman, and we know that women also experience oppression. And if we think about the gender pay gap as an example, women make about 80 cents on the dollar compared to white men. And if we think about minority women, so women of color, they make even less money on the dollar than white women and than white men. So that's something to keep in mind, is that this is all contextual and these things are all operating together. They're not isolated. We can't analyze a social issue or a social institution and think only about race or only about gender or only about class. All of those aspects of our identity are always operating in all social situations, issues, and institutions. So keep that in mind. And of course, McIntosh's article points out this way of thinking about social issues and situations and privilege and oppression isn't supposed to be a way to point fingers or invoke shame, right? It's a way for us to better understand our own experiences, the experiences of others, as well as the social world in which we live. So keep that in mind. However, one of the overarching themes in all of these articles is that microaggressions that invoke gender violence happen in all these different ways, right? So privilege and oppression can really cause some problematic situations to occur where gender violence happens. Or violence more broadly, if we think about police as a social institution and we think about organizations such as Black Lives Matter and how they're drawing attention to the fact that Black people and people of color are disproportionately killed by police officers. That's a way to think about social institutions, privilege and oppression, and violence. Moving on to the Valenti article, Valenti points out that the idea of virginity is a social construct and that no matter how hard she tried to research the term, she couldn't find a medical definition for it. She then talks about how this essentially means that the way we as a society think about issues related to virginity and sex are very gendered. And if we think a little bit deeper about that, and I pose some of these questions to you on our week 2 page, we can start to think about the way in which ideas around gender and sex and virginity slate our society in a way where we start to perceive relationship violence in a particular way. So where men have power and control, and they have more agency in terms of what they want regarding sex and sexual acts and that sort of thing. And then finally, there's the Steinem article, If Men Can Menstruate, where she's flipping the script and saying that if men were the gender that menstruated, then society would look different and the way that we would understand periods would be different. And a lot of that, and she drills down into some of the issues related to violence, so I won't go into too much detail. I think that aspect is a little self-explanatory, but essentially all these articles are talking about small ways in which gender violence happens or is invoked in our everyday lives, in these sort of less obvious ways than just an example of a man killing his female partner or something like that, which again is atrocious and awful, and we must care about that and talk about that. But there are these other smaller ways that gender violence happens in our everyday life that are less obvious, and so that's what we're sort of honing in on this week. And then finally, since you have an extra reading this week, I had the video be as short as possible. This is a short public safety announcement video that was created by young adults for young adults, demonstrating what dating violence can look like among teenagers. It's really important to acknowledge that dating violence among teenagers can happen. There's a lot of stigma or disbelief around that. Folks think, oh, if the couple isn't married, then the woman can just get away if she's experiencing violence. But we know that's not true. And some of the tactics demonstrated here in this video say something about or demonstrate the ways in which men keep women in these violent situations. If folks have any questions about dating violence specific to UH Manoa students, feel free to check out the Title IX website or the UH System Office of Institutional Equity for more information about those experiences or resources available to students who are having or experiencing dating violence. That is something that is covered under Title IX policy. So there are resources and protections available for UH Manoa students experiencing dating violence. And actually, any student going to college or university should have access to resources to help them with dating violence. That's all I have for this week. I hope everyone has an awesome week, and I'll see you next time.